Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends and colleagues. My name is Juliane Campfield. I'm the director here at Deutsches Haus at NYU. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to a very special event tonight. It's sort of a hybrid event. It's a award ceremony and it is a panel discussion. So we're doing a double feature. And I'm also pleased to announce that this event has taught me a new word. And I always thought I knew all the English words, but now I also know the word eleemosynary. And if you don't know the word, start thinking about it. And I'll at some point read the word eleemosynary, and then you'll know what it means if you don't know it yet. And I also had to practice pronouncing it because it's hard to pronounce anyway. I'm just trying to cheer up the room because we live in difficult times and troubling times, and we are, however, here to celebrate tonight. So let's get into the spirit. We will start the evening with a moderated panel discussion on educational policy and academic freedom among Dr. Moaath Alrajab, assistant professor in the Department of Computer Systems at the State University of New York Farmingdale, and an alumnus of the Scholar Rescue Fund of the Institute of International Education. And I should mention that unfortunately, Dr. Alrajab had an accident. He is unfortunately currently still stuck in Brooklyn. He is fine, the other party is fine, but we're not quite sure when he will arrive. So either he will arrive while the conversation is going on or he will arrive later. We'll improvise. We're really good at improvising here. So that's why we're still alive. And I will continue mentioning the other panelists now. Dr. Mariette Westerman, Executive Vice President of the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. Dr. George Rupp, Distinguished Visiting Scholar at Columbia's Institute for Religion, Culture, and Public Affairs, and former President of Columbia University. And last but not least, our good friend Steve Sokol, the President of the American Council of Germany, who will moderate tonight's event. The Educational Policy and Academic Freedom panel will then segue into Deutsches Haus at NYU's annual ceremony celebrating the 2018 Volkmar and Margret Zander Prize awardee. This year, as you all know, we are delighted to award the prestigious prize to the German-American academic, psychiatrist, entrepreneur, and philanthropist, Dr. Henry Jarecki, to honor him for his extraordinary contributions to scholar rescue and providing sanctuary for endangered scholars. Around the world, scholars have long been persecuted, detained, tortured, and harassed. Among other questions, this moderated conversation will examine why academic freedom matters to everyone, not just academics, why it is an essential element of functioning democracies worldwide, why it is crucial to protect the voices and ideas of scholars from around the globe, and why Germany's history plays a special role in this field. Well, why does it? And I think we are today, I think it's November 12th, we just experienced the anniversary of November 9th. That is a good anniversary in terms of the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. It is a terrible anniversary in terms of November 9th in 1938, the Kristallnacht, or rather the Pogromnacht, we should say now. That, of course, creates a certain frame of reference. There's another November 9th, the November 9th of 1918, when the German Kaiser abdicated and the Republic was announced. So we have three big dates in German history, and they are connected to why we're here today, because, of course, in the 1930s, scholars had to leave Germany if they could, and many were helped to be able to leave. And this, of course, set up a pattern. There was a collaboration, there was a system, and this is something that organizations like the Scholar Rescue Fund, but also many other organizations are now looking back at and have been working with to establish new ways for scholars to be rescued in an increasingly difficult global situation. And we will explore this in more detail in the panel. This educational policy and academic freedom discussion is part of the States we are in a new age of transatlantic relations, a series of 6 talks presented by Deutsches Haus at NYU that addresses an array of important topics that are currently intensely debated in both Germany and the United States and, of course, elsewhere. The series of events is supported by the transatlantic program of the Federal Republic of Germany with funds from the European Recovery Program of the Federal Ministry for Economy and Energy. We are grateful for this support. I also would like to thank our distinguished panelists for making time in their very busy schedules to be here tonight and to participate in this timely conversation. My thanks also go to Daniela Keist from Gratias Partners, my favorite partner in crime, for her amazing support over the past weeks to make all this happen. We had daily email communications and things got exciting, but we managed to keep our cool, and thank you for doing a fabulous job. I also would like to thank Sarah Wilcox, formerly with the Scholar Rescue Fund, she's here somewhere, and Marianne Zwicker, my former colleague here at Deutsches Haus at NYU, for building the initial bridge that led to this event. Let me now introduce your panelists to you. So I'll start with Moaath. Unfortunately, as you know, he's not quite here yet, but I'll start with him because his last name starts with an A. Moaath Alrajab is an academic who works at the State University of New York, Farmingdale in the Computer Systems Department. Dr. Alrajab is an alumnus of the Scholar Rescue Fund of the Institute of International Education. He arrived in the US after fleeing the Syrian conflict in 2013. During his IIE Scholar Rescue Fund Fellowship, Dr. Alrajab was a visiting scholar at the University in Exile of the New School University. His research areas focus on machine vision, image processing, and mobile computing. He has published many peer-reviewed articles. He earned a bachelor degree from Al-Ba'at University, Syria, and Masters of Science in Mobile Computing from Bradford University, UK, and a PhD in AI and Machine Vision from the University of Leeds in England. Dr. Alrajab is a vocal advocate for academic freedom. Moving on to George Rupp. He is a distinguished visiting scholar at Columbia's Institute for Religion, Culture, and Public Affairs, and an adjunct professor of religion, public health, and international affairs. Dr. Rupp served as president of the International Rescue Committee from 2002 to 2013. As the IRC's chief executive officer, Dr. Rupp led a staff of more than 12,000 colleagues and oversaw the agency's relief and development operations in over 40 countries and its refugee resettlement and assistance program in 22 cities in the US. During his tenure, the budget of the IRC tripled. The IRC also closed out a 16 million capital campaign at 110 million. Can I hire you for Deutsches Haus, George? Please? We'll talk. Along with the growth of programs in service delivery, advocacy efforts were increased in Washington and New York, and also in London, Brussels, Geneva, Nairobi, and Bangkok. Before joining the IRC, Dr. Rupp served as president of Columbia University. During his 9-year tenure, he focused on enhancing undergraduate education, on strengthening campus ties to surrounding communities and New York City as a whole, and on increasing the university's international orientation. Earlier, Dr. Rupp served as president of Rice University, and before that was the John Lord O'Brien Professor of Divinity and Dean of the Harvard Divinity School. Educated in Germany and Sri Lanka, as well as the US, he is the author of numerous articles and 6 books, including Beyond Individualism, The Challenge of Inclusive Communities. Steve Sokol holds a doctorate in law and policy from Northeastern University, as well as an MA in international relations and international economics from the Johns Hopkins University's Paul-Nitze School of Advanced International Studies, and a BA from Wesleyan University. He has also studied at Heidelberg University, I see a connection to Henry there, and is a Fulbright scholar at the Freie Universität Berlin. Dr. Sokol has been president of the American Council on Germany since May 2015. Before that, he served as president and CEO of the World Affairs Council of Pittsburgh And prior to that, he was the vice president and director of programs at the ACG. They're very lucky that they got you back. Dr. Sokol, yes, and that too. Dr. Sokol has more than 20 years of experience working with nonprofit organizations in Europe and the US, and has spent over a decade working at nonpartisan, membership-based organizations focusing on a range of domestic and foreign policy issues. We're almost there. We just have another stellar biographical note to go through. Mariette Westerman is the executive vice president of the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, directs the foundation's grant-making programs, and works closely with the president and her fellow officers on strategic directions and initiatives. Prior to taking up her position in 2010, Dr. Westermann was the first provost and chief academic officer of New York University Abu Dhabi, charged with directing the development of the new campus and overseeing the design of the academic program and recruitment of the faculty. At NYU, she had previously served as director and Paulette Goddard professor at the Institute of Fine Arts. Earlier in her career, Dr. Westermann held positions as Associate Director of Research at the Clark Art Institute and as Assistant and Associate Professor at Rutgers University. A historian of Netherlandish art, Dr. Westermann is the author of A Worldly Art, The Dutch Republic, 1585 till 1718, The Amusements of Jan Steen, Comic Painting in the 17th Century, Rembrandt, and the numerous articles and reviews. She edited Anthropologies of Art and 4 volumes of the Netherlands Yearbook for History of Art. Her collaborations with museums include her Rijksmuseum dossier Johannes Vermeer and curatorship of the exhibition Art and Home, Dutch Interiors in the Age of Rembrandt. Dr. Westermann's current interests concern Dutch art in the global 17th century and the Garden of Eden in the imagination of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Dr. Westermann earned her BA at Williams College and her MA and PhD at NYU's Institute of Fine Arts. She has received fellowships and grants from the American Philosophical Society, Center for Advanced Study in the Visual Arts, Clark Art Institute, and National Endowment for the Humanities. Dr. Westermann serves on the boards of the Little Red Schoolhouse, Mass MoCA, the International Alliance for the Protection of Cultural Heritage in Conflict Zones, and the Institute of International Education. We'll have the conversation now, and then afterwards you'll have time for questions and comments for around 10 minutes. Then we'll continue with the evening for the second part of the double feature with the award ceremony. So please join me in welcoming our distinguished panelists now. Thank you.
So Juliana, thank you so much for letting me be part of this double feature. I'm absolutely delighted to be here tonight. It's always a treat to be back at Deutsches Haus at NYU, and particularly on this occasion for what I think is a very timely and important conversation, but also to celebrate Henry Jarecki. And so before I dive into the panel discussion, not only did Henry Jarecki and I both study in Heidelberg, but we also both sit on an advisory board here in New York for Heidelberg University. And as the sole representative of that advisory board, it's my huge duty and responsibility just to express congratulations to you this evening. So I want to start with that. And I know that the others would have liked to have been here this evening, but at least I'm here to pass the greetings on. So thank you for the collaboration, for the good work that we're able to do together. As Juliana said in her opening remarks, history matters. History is important, and it's very difficult to think about a conversation like this evening's about educational policy and academic freedom coming on the heels of the 100th anniversary of the end of World War I and the anniversary of the Reichskristallnacht, or the pogrom that you described before. In thinking about this evening and about the conversation this evening, I thought about the exodus of writers, of thinkers, of intellectuals during the Third Reich. And I mean, I think as everybody in this room knows, beginning in 1933, hundreds of German scientists and intellectuals were forced to leave. They went to places like the United Kingdom, the United States, but also dozens of other countries in order to protect their livelihoods and, of course, their lives. And this incredible intellectual exodus, which I think we'll probably talk about tonight as academic migration, had significant implications on Germany, but also on the countries that absorbed those refugees. So what I thought we could do to try to build a bridge from then to now is maybe for me to ask each of you what some of the similarities, but also what some of the significant differences might be between the 1930s and today when it comes to academic migration. And I don't know which of you would like to go first, who of you would like to go first, but ladies first, so Mariette.
It's not always an advantage to be a lady. But thank you very much, Steve, and thank you everyone here. And it's just such an honor to be on this panel, honoring someone who's been in this work for so long. Henry Jarecki, congratulations, and really very pleased to be here. So I think thinking about this academic migration and how it differs and how it's maybe the same, one maybe has to take a little step back and say, what is it what sends people on the move? What forces academic migration in the first place? And you have cited, of course, the rise of Nazism and pogroms as the driving force in the 1930s. Comparing that situation to today, I am sort of two minds. I grew up in the Netherlands under the smoke of World War II. Parents liberated in Amsterdam and Indonesia by America and Canada. Growing up thinking that in effect, these matters that this should never happen again had been adjudicated, that the European economic community was the bulwark against nativism, nationalism, and fascism. This was bred in the bone if you grew up in the Netherlands. It was almost natural for me to end up going to Williams College or any kind of school in the United States because they were the liberators. It was the beacon of freedom. And I ended up writing my undergraduate thesis in history on economic integration as in Europe as the bulwark against this not happening again. And here we are. We are in a very different world order. So these verities of my youth and even my college education seem suddenly very badly upended. And I think all of us have had that experience. That said, where I'm of another mind, I have to say, you have to still hope that we've learned something. The McCarthy era, this is not yet in any event. I think that the questions of mechanisms of international solidarity that were built going back 100 years too, the other 100th anniversary we will very soon have is of the Institute of International Education and its work. And I think there is resiliency, I hope, in those civil society institutions of a greater extent, in part because our academic societies are so much more integrated internationally, no matter what our governments are doing in terms of closing borders, that I'm still hopeful we're not quite at that place of the 30s. So maybe I can start there and say something about academic migration later, but I really would love for George to make his comments.
Well, I agree with all of what Mariette has just said. It seems to me there are both remarkable similarities and also stark differences. I probably have a more vivid sense of the differences because of my work with the International Rescue Committee. As you may or probably don't know, the International Rescue Committee was founded in 1933 at the suggestion of Albert Einstein that it would be good to have a committee of notables, that's the odd name, to work with counterparts in Europe to bring refugees who were persecuted by the Nazis into this country and help them get back on their feet. And that really is the core purpose of the International Rescue Committee. And in its original years, it worked disproportionately with the kind of people that you both have just described. I mean, very high human capital, high levels of human capital, largely Jewish but not exclusively, who, if they could be rescued and brought into this country, were sure to become major contributors to the society as a whole, which they have done, and their children have done. And so many of the children and grandchildren are major supporters of the International Rescue Committee. But the kind of immigrants of refugees who are resettled now are only to a very slight degree the kind of intellectuals that the Scholar Rescue Fund helps to resettle. But the vast majority are people who have fled conflict all over the world, not just mainly in one country or in Western Europe, and who therefore are much more demanding in terms of what is required for them to be integrated into the society as a whole. So I think that if we look for continuities between the 30s and now, we'll find it more in the Scholar Rescue Fund, which has continued the original tradition of Institute of International Education and brings and finds scholars and rescues them and puts them back on their feet. I think that's enormously important. I'm not in any way suggesting that it isn't, but it's a very small segment of the refugee population that's being resettled now in comparison to what was the case in the 30s. So I see more a contrast. I mean, there are continuities, but on the substance, the substantial numbers, I think, are really quite different now compared to the 30s.
Do you want to add to that? Do you want to come back?
Yes, I can add a little bit on the question of the resettlement, the rescue, the welcome extended to scholars and scientists. And two things there. In the 1930s, we now have a lionizing and heroic story of the West's actions towards, or America's actions, Canada's actions, Britain's actions towards scholars on the run. But the history is actually quite complex, and if you delve into some of these records, and some historians have done that, there are some, frankly, toe-curling and embarrassing statements made at the highest levels of the American academy, institutions like Harvard, Princeton, and so forth, as they were trying to organize some of these rescue efforts, where there were real worries about, first of all, about young American academics being perhaps displaced by people from Germany, and sometimes thinly veiled comments about the undesirable Germanization of the American universities. And remember, in the 1930s, and even well after 1930s, Jewish people were not especially welcome in American universities. It took a long time to bring that on. So I think we need to, there's a certain similarity there, in fact, to the 30s. I do agree fully with George that when you see applications to Scholar Rescue Fund and Scholars at Risk and many other organizations that work in this zone, especially in Germany, actually, there are very important initiatives underway. Overall, the character, or what you would say, this traditional academic level of the scholars probably doesn't quite compare. We have a much larger universe of people to deal with, as you've said, and also there are historical inequalities in the academic systems in the sending countries, which are primarily, at the moment, of course, the Middle East. Turkey is a bit of an exception, in part because the Turkish Academy was built in part in collaboration with Germany and other academic systems in the West. And so you see a lot of differentiation. And I think it is very hard to blame Syrian and Lebanese scholars. I'm not saying you're doing that at all, but it is hard for a Scholar Rescue Selection Committee to judge some of these scholars who have barely had a chance to develop in the way that we ourselves in our countries might, to apply quite those same standards. And so what I think has been very positive on selection committees like Scholar Rescue is that we are really looking to human potentials now and what could happen to these people who are caught in the throes of war and persecution if they were given the chance. So I would say that our standards are really often a little bit more of a developmental character now, and I frankly think that's a positive, net positive, in that some of these inequalities between academic systems around the world are something we ought to be working on and mitigating in any event.
Let me ask both of you if you think that we've become more tolerant, or less tolerant in the meantime? To what, I mean, you've both thrown out a lot of different thoughts, and one word that has not come up, I think, has been tolerance. Has there been a change in tolerance?
You go. You're a philosopher of this question.
Well, it seems to me that we have what can be said positively is that we've had considerable experience with the process of incorporating into the pluralism of our society people who come from very different backgrounds. And that experience generates both positive and negative energies. On the positive side, it means that we are welcoming or tolerant in a way that we didn't have the opportunity to be when those scholars who were coming our way tended to be much more similar in background and training to American scholars than they are today. But it's also very clear, as Mariette said, that there was major prejudice against, in particular, not only Germans, but Jewish Germans who were coming over to be here. And that it would be, I think, naive of us to think that we've outgrown that kind of prejudice against what is different, even with the experience that we've had. So it's much more multicultural, but it certainly has not become tolerant all the way around of people wherever they come from. Now, my comments earlier about numbers really wasn't that scholarly refugees today are so different from the way they were then, although they may not be quite trained to the right tail of the distribution the way the best of the immigrants in the 30s were. But rather the focus was on the fact that there are so many refugees applying and being accepted for admission to the United States until the Trump administration, who don't have academic backgrounds at all. I mean, who are going to really have to work their way from the ground up in ways that the specific refugees from the Nazis didn't have to do.
Right, that this is a subset, yeah. A very small subset today.
And a very important subset, but still a very small subset of the total.
The question of tolerance is very curious when you think about it. As I'm sure people know, the word tolerance and tolerate goes back to the Latin root to suffer. You know, we will suffer you in our midst. Now, Jesus suffered the little children come unto him. So I think there's also a positive in this, a certain welcome extended. And I would agree with George that global exposure of people to each other through an age of cheap air travel, through the internet, is pronounced. And so there is a sense that we can learn more about the conditions of others. And surely that has helped propel magnificent humanitarian responses, even though they are never enough. And we know that as well. What seems very challenging at the moment is that maybe that sense of personal tolerance that people may feel they have or think they have seems to be very fragile. The sense of international solidarity seems very fragile in a moment of rising global inequality. When it is really easy for the demagogues, just as we saw in the 30s, this is where there's a real similarity, to play into fears of people who are actually poorer than you, less less well off than you, people who nonetheless may have perfectly good things to contribute to your country, and just it seems very easy to demonize these people and to shade, you know, to overlay the question of the person on the run who arrives kind of poor and dirty, and sort of almost assume that because they're poor and dirty and on the run, maybe there's something a little bit wrong with them, and that kind of, or a lot wrong with them, as we see in the highest level of governmental rhetoric, right? Or so among our elected officials. So I do worry that whatever tolerance we may have learned over the years that we should be feeling is fragile when it comes to these kind of moments where people feel a certain fragility about their own situation, their own economic rights.
Well, I couldn't agree more, and the apprehension we all have to feel at the ways in which authoritarian governments can exploit the sense of difference and marginalization is something really to be worried about. It's not just in the United States. I mean, think of Hungary, think of Italy, think of, well, you can go down a long list, and unfortunately an infection that is spreading. But I do think it's important for us to remind ourselves that we, as Mariette just said, that we can learn from our experience of living with people who are different. And I can't resist telling a quick story about that. The International Rescue Committee, because of its origins in resettling refugees from the Nazis in this country, it continues to do that. It's now a much smaller part of what we do because we're involved all over the world, and that's where most of the 12,000 IRC staff are operating. But the ones in this country, when I was at the IRC, we had 22 resettlement offices. And almost always, when a refugee is resettled by an office, it works, and it's very hard. They have to be on their own feet within a matter of months, because that's the only support that's provided. But occasionally it didn't work, and so we had what we called secondary settlement, where someone just, for a variety of reasons, it seemed to us we just had to give it another try in another place. And the office that was most often taken for these resettlements that didn't succeed in the first place was Salt Lake City. And I have to admit, with Northeastern provincial prejudices, I thought, well, wait a minute, Utah, well, that can't possibly be the best place. And so when I visited there, I really was very intrigued with trying to figure out why that was the case. And I think the answer is actually very simple. Although Salt Lake City is less Mormon than the rest of Utah, it's about 45% Mormon. But most of those Mormons had spent a couple of years as missionaries in another country. And so they knew what it was like to live in a country that was not their home country. And because of that, they were just enormously welcoming to people who were different. And they didn't try to convert them to be Mormons. I mean, they basically recognized these people had to get on their feet, and they knew what it was like to be in a country where that wasn't the case. I think in a microcosm, if Salt Lake City can be welcoming to people who are different, then all of us can learn that. And in New York, in many ways, because it is so multicultural, does better than many other places. But I think we have learned some tolerance in the last couple of decades.
So another place that has absorbed a number of refugees and is known for some of its refugee resettlement is Pittsburgh. And as Juliana mentioned, I spent some time in Pittsburgh, but one of the things that Pittsburgh also has is an institution called City of Asylum, which is a place that offers refuge for writers in exile. And I think we hear a lot more about writers in exile, journalists who are under threat and not able to freely express themselves. Then we hear about threats against scholars, at least in terms of the mainstream press, that's the case. And I'm wondering how each of you sees sort of the level of academic freedom today as opposed to, say, 5 or even 10 years ago. Is the situation getting worse? Is it something we need to be watching more closely, or do you see some sort of opportunities for some optimism?
Well, I think that's a really difficult question to answer. As I've already said, that the McCarthy era it is not, but I certainly feel much more unnerved now than I did 5 to 10 years ago. We have an incredible expert in this room in the form of Rob Quinn, who is the head of Scholars at Risk. And I think through the work of Scholars at Risk, which performs an incredible service of monitoring attacks on academic freedom around the world and publishes an annual report called Free to Think. Well, the last one came out last week or 2 weeks ago, and I've been reading it and studying it, and I almost started thinking it should be called Unfree to Think, or Free Not to Think, or Unfree to Think. And I think that report, which documents attacks of all sorts around the world, that it is able to verify twice through 2 different sources independently. It does incredibly rigorous work, and they documented almost 300 attacks in the most recent academic year. You might say 300 attacks around the world. Well, you know, maybe we can tolerate that, maybe we can handle that. But when you read about what they are, it really is rather harrowing to see in how many countries they occur. Everything from loss of position, questioning of what's being taught on campuses, attacks on, of course, famously, the Central European University, attacks on academic freedom in Poland, interference with students not being allowed to protest, students being thrown in jail, people disappearing, scholars disappearing, the kinds of scholars who don't make it out through Scholar Rescue Fund or Scholars at Risk, entire shuttering of universities in Turkey. The list goes on and on and on, and it is around the world, from Venezuela to Pakistan to Afghanistan to individual scholars in India. It truly is an absolutely, you almost can't remember how much of it there is. And as Rob himself always so generously says, this is just the tip of the iceberg. We are just only telling you what we can actually find. And I think just reading the reports over the years, I do think things feel a little darker and harder. This is the first year that the report has 4 pages on academic climate in the United States. And I think it is very welcome that SAR pays attention to this. Again, I don't think the situation is quite as harrowing as it is in Pakistan or in Turkey, but we need to be very mindful and watchful. So I think the best person to answer the question really is Rob.
Well, I agree with that, and I think when we get to the exchanges with the audience, maybe Rob, you can pick up a little more on that.
So then let's build the bridge back to Germany if we can. Since 2002, when IIE's Scholar Rescue Fund was started, Germany has consistently been among the top 4 countries hosting scholars. But in 2016 and 2017, it dramatically increased its engagement. There have been several new programs. One of them is the Baden-Württemberg Fund for Persecuted Scholars that Henry started, and George, where you sit on the selection committee. You, George, talked about this a little bit, but I guess I'd be interested in hearing from both of you why you think Germany has increased its engagement, and whether there are any lessons that one can learn from the experiences in Germany in terms of rescue scholar programs that could maybe be applied elsewhere as well.
Well, again, I think it's not only scholar rescue programs, but acceptance of asylum seekers and refugees more broadly than that. And there's no question that Angela Merkel set the standard that other countries have not measured up to in terms of welcoming both scholars and other asylum seekers. And it obviously was not without its political costs for her. And I think that's been a kind of a warning to others who might have followed in her footsteps. But they've set an example that if you correct for the size of population, that this dwarfs anything that other countries have done. And what is tragic is that during the last couple of years, we've gone dramatically in the other direction in terms of the admission of refugees and asylum seekers, dramatically in the other direction, and without any apology or intention of making corrections until there's a change in administrations. And that is deeply dismaying, and I contrast it. I find myself saying positive things about George W. Bush more often than I have ever imagined I would. But after 9/11, the refugee resettlement numbers really plummeted because for reasons that new security systems had to be set up. Obviously there was this huge popular sense that we didn't want to let people in who might be dangerous to us, and the numbers did go down, although they only went a little lower than they've already gone under the Trump administration. And I and a couple of other heads of resettlement agencies went in to talk directly to Bush and said, look, we believe you that you aren't against having refugees admitted to this country, and we understand why there has to be an adjustment in the short term. But if you're serious about wanting to welcome refugees as America has done in the past, once there is that adjustment, then you have to invest some money into preserving the infrastructure of the 10 organizations that resettle refugees in this country. And the Bush administration did that. They allocated unrestricted funds because they were intent on raising the number of refugees, academic as well as others, after an adjustment and processes could be made. It's unimaginable that the current administration would do that because they don't want to have refugees in the future. They want to use this excuse to sort of shut it down. So the only response that is feasible on that front is a political one. It seems to me clear the current administration cannot, has to be resisted and then voted out of office, or there will be huge differences in the welcoming of refugees.
I agree that Germany has been true north on this topic for Europe and for the Western world. And to take it back from this larger point that George has rightly made to the support for refugee scholars in particular, which are really, really very much more front of mind in Germany than they are here. You're right about that point, Steve. And going back to connect this to the question about the tax on academic freedom, I think that in Germany there has been a very successful re-education effort in the 70s and 80s to connect younger German generations to what happened in the 30s in a sense that it wasn't right and shouldn't happen again. And so the connection between a tax on academic freedom, which are not the same as a tax on on freedom of speech quite, they're connected issues. But I think that many Germans actually understand the connection between a tax on academic freedom and a flourishing democracy, that universities teach young people and bring research into the world that has to be contribute to the flourishing of society, not only the intellectual capital and the economic development that comes from universities, but also the fact that being able to think freely, discuss freely, work out nuances and problems in academic settings is where democracy gets modeled and fed. I think there's a clear understanding of that comes out in these many conferences, international conferences that especially Berlin tends to host these days in this area where the most important providers of scholar rescue around the world come together to share learnings and learn. A more bureaucratic, just little example that I can give of what I think we're learning from the German reinvestment in scholar rescue programs, such as the Philipp Schwarz initiative that's now had 5 rounds and provided for about 150 scholars so far. They have really relaxed how they think about who counts as a scholar to be rescued. And I mean that in the following way. Because these resources are so scarce on the whole, programs like Scholar Rescue Fund have always said, we're really kind of looking for people who don't already have asylum or people who don't really have, or who probably still under very threatened conditions. Germany just said, look, Angela Merkel just has let in all these people. It's cost her politically, but we still mostly, in the academy, we think this is a good idea. We need to step up. And so all those many people who have already come from Syria, from Turkey, from Iraq, if they're already here, and they've seen their academic careers completely cut off at the pass, we're going to find placement for them in universities. And we're not going to award them individually, we're going to make the universities come to us, to our fund, and say, we want to host scholar X, Y, and Z for these reasons. And if you let that scholar come with their fellowship, we will integrate them into our academic community in the following way. Give them professional development to find a path out, whether into other academic positions or into other research type positions they might find outside the academy. And although this program is still young, I think we are learning a lot from what it takes for universities to do that well. It's been really rather inspiring to see.
So let me ask one more question and then open it up to all of you for a couple of questions. And that is, for each of you, obviously it's a question of resources, right? You've both talked a little bit about that. But what else can be done to protect scholars who are under threat? Are there any ideas out there that have not really been turned into practice yet, but where you see some low-hanging fruit or where you see some opportunities for engagement?
Shall I start?
Yeah.
It's hard. Well, we're trying to source innovation. We're actually trying to learn from all these different providers, bring them together in conferences. And when I say we, it's not just the Mellon Foundation, it is organizations like the Volkswagen Foundation, Scholars at Risk, Gratias Partners. We really need to pull together better, I think, across our providing and funding organizations to learn what works best, what each of our organizations is best set up to do. And so that is one way of, I think, scaling up the effort. Two areas of that real need a lot of attention, I think, is what happens after the fellowship runs out. 1-2 years in Jordan, and then you're not allowed to work in Jordan. It doesn't go very far unless you can go on from there. Similar situations apply, of course, in our own country and in Germany and elsewhere in Europe. So we need to think about the pathway on past that initial set of needs. People like Sarah have really focused my attention on this over the years. And yet, while the flow of people is so continuous and so there's so much need, it's also hard to shift resources away from bringing more people into fellowship. So you sort of need to push on all cylinders. One area where I think a lot more work can be done that doesn't necessarily protect more scholars, but it could deploy them more actively in the maintenance of academic cultures or the hopes of for those cultures in their home countries through different forms of online communication and education. And that's an area we're beginning to see how that can be done safely, how security for scholars or especially students who want to participate can be guaranteed. We know that in Turkey is what's really focused our mind on this, of course, because and Syria too. So many students in Turkey are out on the street purely because those universities were shut down with presumably Gulenist associations. And so providing for that generation that just has no place to go is much on the mind, not just of people around the world in universities, but especially Turkish scholars who have left the country to work in safety elsewhere. So there's probably opportunity there.
Thank you.
In terms of scaling up in the face of inadequate resources, there really are only, even in theory, a couple of options. One is to transform the universities in their home countries so they can stay and have academic freedom there. I mean, that seems to me a kind of limiting option that is not very likely. A second is to work with refugees in the place to which they fled. So that in the case of Syrians, it would be especially in Jordan, but also in other neighboring countries, and to try to give programs to them that will keep their intellectual capacities alive, even though there's no place for them to go elsewhere. And the third is to work hard to make sure that when conditions change, they will be able to go back to their home countries. Those are all going to be very difficult to implement, will still require substantial resources, and will only at the limits make much difference.
Thank you. So I'm guessing we can take 3 questions time-wise. We'll see. Any questions? Any comments?
My name is Leah Diaz, and I'm a visiting scholar here at NYU. So, yeah, I was very interested in this comment that you made about the Free to Think report. So I wanted to ask you whether, if now we're going to a period where it seems that democracy is more fragile and we are becoming more authoritarian, if this is a global trend or there's any hope that maybe what is happening now generally, that we can have the chance to go back again maybe to a more free speech, more free press, and go back to the important values of democracy. Thank you so much.
Well, I certainly hope. So I think I understand the question. I understand your question as, is this just a moment that for where we can imagine a reversal towards greater openness and economic? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so I'm repeating your question, so make sure that I got it. And the question is, I am not certain whether we are in a moment or a more prolonged period. I do think that some very basic problems of economic inequality need to be resolved, or we need to mitigate those. Big global challenges, we are going to need to address them together. But I do see that so much of this fear mongering comes out of these questions of inequality that I'm sort of focused on that. I do believe that the forces of resistance to these movements are on the rise, and I think that's a good thing. We are seeing some revivals of interest in traditional international academic collaboration. The UN is creating a museum that's getting some traction around the world and so forth. So I think the forces of resistance are there, but we have to be very vigilant.
I'm just wondering whether we should have Rob Quinn and Sarah Wilcox just see if they have a kind of a word or two they would like to say, because they've been involved with this in great depth for a long time.
So thank you both, and thank you, Mariette, for mentioning the report. Can you hear me? Yeah, so the report, by the way, is free to think. It's available online if anyone would like to see it. I think in answer to the question, are things getting worse? The question is no, definitely yes. And I should have started by saying congratulations, Henry. We've been doing this work for almost 20 years together now. 20 years ago, I would have said, I don't know, I can't answer. But we have the data now. It is getting worse. On the plus side, there are some things we can do. I think the word I haven't heard, but to me is absolutely central to all of this, is legitimacy. Scholars are attacked because they demand the opportunity to ask serious questions and get serious answers, and authoritarians don't like that. They want simple answers or absurd answers and no one asking questions about them. So it's that dynamic of asserting the legitimacy of asking questions is at the heart of the targeting of scholars, at the targeting of students, at the targeting of universities. So I think when we ask what can we do to assert the legitimacy? And as one example, in a month, the European Parliament will be hopefully voting up a recommendation that academic freedom be an element of European foreign policy. So inspired by the reports of what was going on, they said we want to reassert that value as part of the foreign policy. In the US, that has been one of the elements of the US State Department reports for decades. So academic freedom is a principle there. We simply have to assert that our administration follows that principle and supports it. And I think all of us who work at universities, all of our universities are international. We're all engaged in partnerships that are very complex partnerships. How do we make sure academic freedom is part of those partnerships? And when there are incidents where there are uncomfortable pressures against academics in those partnerships, what do we do?
Thank you. And then there was a question in the third row, and then I'll come back to the panel. Come to you.
Who had the question?
Just a quick question. How much do you get involved in educating students or educating the public about the reasons why there are refugees? And this might sound like a not so obvious question, but because we know there are wars and all that, but in my opinion, the real reason is the Western world and American politics in the past, let's say, at least 80 years that caused all these uprootings of people. Like American politics in South America definitely caused all the turmoil over there and in the Middle East and everywhere. So my question is, are you getting involved in programs that educates the public about the history of all these, of the reasons why we have refugees?
So taking a stab at that. So speaking now from the point of view of the Mellon Foundation, we support this kind of work, which is how I've gotten into it more. And sure, the Mellon Foundation funds lots of academic inquiry, and we let people do the academic inquiry freely, and we don't say what it should be. And you can be sure that in the, several hundred grants we make a year, programs, we fund American universities. So you can be sure there's a lot of critique and there's a lot of education that goes on around it. When it comes to the work of rescuing scholars and supporting students who've been cut off from education, I think it's true. There are enormously complex reasons for that, but we're really focused on helping those scholars and students first. And although these other areas you address, sure, better education of the public about these matters would be good, there's not such a direct connection there to make to drawing more resources to these people who are in very great need and who also defend, by being academics who ask difficult questions, as Rob has suggested, defend academic freedom for all of us. So that's really where our focus resides.
Dr. Alrajab, we're delighted that you're here. We're very happy that although you were in an accident, you're okay. We have had this conversation without you, and I'm sorry that you've missed out on it. But as we wrap things up, I want to give you an opportunity to tell us a little bit about your story as a threatened scholar in Syria and how you have made the way to being a professor here in the United States. And maybe just very briefly, if you can tell us about a couple of the biggest challenges that you faced along that way that would, I think, enlighten all of us and also help us understand from the first person how difficult this transition has been.
Good evening, everybody. I'm extremely honored and pleased to be part of this panel and this discussion. And I apologize for being that late. It just, as you mentioned, it was out of my hand. Yes, I am a Syrian scholar, as you mentioned. I was teaching in Homs University. It's a university named after the ruling party called Al-Ba'ath University, based in the third largest city in the country. I was a professor that teach computer science related subject. I got nothing to do with politics. And in 2011, when the crisis in Syria started, so peaceful protesters went out to the street, and most of them were my students. At the beginning, in March 2011, most of the protesters were mainly young college students who were seeking and trying to make the country better, seeking more freedom and so on. So I was like naturally part of the peaceful movement at the beginning. I was known in the community because of different reasons. Because one of the reasons why I was known, among others, because of my work with the Red Cross and Red Crescent in the province where I used to teach. So I took a little bit of kind of natural leadership, and my students used to talk to me when they want to organize going out and voice their opinion. And that put me in a lot of trouble. So I have, before the crisis, nothing to do with politics, but the government did not like any, I would say, kind of people lead or be part of this movement outside their consent. So I was arrested several times. I was threatened. I lost, during the first few months of the crisis, many of my family, including my father, brother, and others, and I was forced to leave the country. It wasn't easy. So in 2011, the crisis started being peaceful, but gradually become kind of less peaceful. And other groups start to get involved, including the Islamists and so on. So I was in trouble from the government side as well as the opposition. None liked me being there. So it was the only way for me to survive is to leave the country. And it wasn't an easy trip. So during the first few months of the conflict, up to mid-2012, I did not have that much of interaction with the outside world. And honestly, I did not know whether there is an organization that can help scholars. And just like, so I fled the country through the Syrian desert. And I walked for long time. And it was really trouble. The way I escaped my province, by that time, in 2012, Homs was besieged. So it wasn't easy for me to leave either from the opposition group and the government side. So I had to walk through the desert. up to the Turkish border. And when I managed to get into Turkey, I was in touch with the Scholar Rescue Fund, and they did amazing job. So they gave me a lot of support while I'm in Turkey, and they helped me find a hosting institute, and things turned really much better once I contacted Scholar Rescue Fund. Namely, James King was my officer, and he helped me through the whole process.
So based on these firsthand experiences, do you have any advice for how the program can be improved or strengthened, or what can be done to help scholars at risk?
I would say, like, before the crisis, I did not know about this program. And probably that's natural for somebody who did not feel threatened not to know about such a program. I would definitely advise that more outreach should be done, especially into countries that might experience such kind of conflict, or the people who are experiencing this conflict. So knowing that there is an organization such as Scholar Rescue Fund will definitely strengthen the academics around the world, and they will feel that there is an organization or people who care about their safety, about their freedom, and so on.
So unfortunately, I feel as though we're only scraping the surface, and we could continue quite a bit. But the first part of the double feature, I think, I'm looking at Juliana to see sort of, yes, this is the direction you have to go in, or no, we can continue the discussion. But I think, since we do have a double feature tonight, we have to bring this to a close. But I want to thank all three of you for this incredibly rich conversation. And I hope that all three of you will stick around, because after the second part of the double feature, there will be an opportunity for all of you to continue the conversation with our three speakers. But I want to thank all three of you, truly. This has been a fantastic discussion. Thank you very, very much. Thank you.
Let me also thank you, Mariette, George, Moaath, and Steve, for sharing your knowledge, expertise, and observations during this very insightful conversation. And thank you for sharing your thoughts and questions during the Q&A. I also thought, in a way, this was a beautiful laudation for Henry and for the work you do, have been doing, will do, are involved with. So instead of a laudation, we have a panel discussion that exemplifies your mission. And I think this is a new format we've tried. The previous Zander prizes just had laudations. That was great too. But sometimes it's worth exploring a new idea. I'm really glad we did that. And thanks again to the four of you, and for everybody else chiming in. That said, now we have arrived at the beginning of the second act, the second movie, so to speak. And so Deutsches Haus is once more delighted and honored to award a Volkmar and Margret Zander Award here in our auditorium. This is our 6th award, and we will award it, surprise, to Dr. Henry Jarecki, and I'm repeating myself, the distinguished academic, psychiatrist, entrepreneur, and philanthropist. Please allow me to introduce this remarkable person to you in a bit more detail now. Henry Jarecki is chairman of the board of directors of the Falconwood Corporation, an investment banking company managing investments in numerous businesses, including Psychogenics, a biotechnology company, and Gresham Investment Company, the Guana Island Hotel Corporation, and Audubon Holdings, a real estate holding and development company, both in the British Virgin Islands. Dr. Jarecki's business career has included the management, and in 1986, the sale to Standard Chartered Bank of London, England, of control of the Moaath Group, an international bullion dealing enterprise that was founded in London in 1671. the founding, management, and ultimate sale in 1995 to Société Générale of Paris, France, of Brody White and Company, the chairmanship until its sale in 1999 to America Online of Moviefone. I used that quite a bit myself at the time, liked it. A public company engaged in the provision of information and ticketing services for motion pictures, and the founding and management of Psychogenics, a drug discovery and contract research enterprise located in Tarrytown, New York. A diplomate of the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology since 1963, Dr. Jarecki is licensed to practice medicine and surgery in Connecticut, New York, and the British Virgin Islands. He's currently professor of psychiatry at the Yale University School of Medicine. Dr. Jarecki was born in Stettin, Germany, and received his medical degree from the University of Heidelberg in 1957. He has written extensively about both financial markets and medicine. His, now it comes, eleemosynary activities include being a governor of the Community College of the British Virgin Islands, a founder of the Youth Empowerment Project of Tortola in the British Virgin Islands, and a director of the Harlem School of the Arts. In 2000, Dr. Jarecki joined the Board of Trustees of the Institute of International Education. He was pivotal in helping launching IIE's Scholar Rescue Fund that helps threatened scholars continue productive academic work. He recently launched a program to enable German universities to host such scholars in association with the Ministry of Science, Research and the Arts of Baden-Württemberg. In 2016, the Federal Republic of Germany awarded him the Order of Merit, Officer's Cross, for his work to improve relations between Germany and the US. And all these distinguished achievements make me lose my voice. You can obviously see that Dr. Jarecki is a Renaissance man, and if I read this bio information anywhere else, I thought the writer, I think I would think the writer is on crack or something. It's combining such a spectrum of things that I find, I wonder how your brain works. I hope you've made provisions for people to study it at some point. I'm sure they'll come up with fascinating results. In any case, before we move on with the prize, I want to say a few words about the Zander Prize. Many of you are familiar with it, but please bear with me, and I want to make sure that everybody knows all the details about it and its history. Now that we are in the 6th year, I think we can say it has a history. As most of you will know, the Volkmar and Margret Zander Prize was established by Professor Margret Zander in memory of her late husband, Professor Volkmar Zander, former head of the German department of NYU and founder and first director of Deutsches Haus at NYU, who passed away in 2011. The prize, which was awarded for the first time in 2013 to the late Professor Fritz Stern, and in the following year to Dr. Gary Smith, then the executive director of the American Academy in Berlin, to Dr. Leah Friedrich Pfeiffer, the president of the Max Kade Foundation in 2015, to Dr. Klaus Leggevi in 2016, and last year to Carsten Vogt, is awarded annually and is endowed with a $5,000 grant kindly donated by Margret Zander, and honors individuals who have made outstanding contributions to the cultural, political, and academic relationship between the German-speaking world and the United States. Deutsches Haus at NYU continues to be very grateful to Margret Zander for establishing this annual award, thereby providing Deutsches Haus at NYU with the much appreciated opportunity to honor such worthy individuals as Dr. Jarecki, whose remarkable work and commitment have been crucial for continuing the transatlantic dialogue, which means so much to everyone assembled here tonight, and which should mean much more to our president, but that's a different chapter. Please let me also thank the friends of Volkmar and Margret Zander, especially Joan Reuterschan and Marty Black, who have been indefatigable champions of the prize and of Deutsches Haus at NYU in general for a long time. I'm therefore delighted to now introduce Joan Reuterschan from the Friends of Volkmar and Margret Zander, who has kindly agreed to say a few words and to deliver greetings from Margret Zander.
Good evening, Dr. Jarecki and distinguished panelists and honored guests. My name is Joan Udershan. I'm one of many members of a group called the Friends of Volkmar and Margret Sander. We're about 90 individuals. We're all former colleagues, co-workers, and students of Volkmar and Margret from both Deutsches Haus and from the NYU German department. We came together as a group in the fall of 2011 here at Deutsches Haus after a celebration of Volkmar Sander's life. We friends are quite dispersed throughout the US and Europe, but we have a sizable contingent here in New York, a number of whom are here this evening. We stay in touch with each other, the house, and as many as possible come yearly to this event, the Volkmar and Margret Sander Prize, which Juliana Camfield always organizes so elegantly. It's my special pleasure this evening to bring you Margret Sander's heartfelt greetings. I visited her in Germany, in Waldammerbach, where she lives, just a few weeks ago. She's well. She sends everyone her very best and is pleased we can all come together here to honor Dr. Henry Jarecki with the Volkmar and Margret Sander Prize. And I do have to say, when I tell her about this format, she'll be just thrilled. It was a fascinating discussion. Thank you to all the panelists. And I know Margaret will be able to watch this when it comes onto the Deutsches Haus website. But it is just a wonderful idea to have your amazing work exemplified by these colleagues of yours. Congratulations to you. And thank you.
Oh, thank you, Joan. Yes, please. And before we actually hand over the award to Dr. Jarecki, I also want to thank my colleagues here at Deutsches Haus, especially Sarah and our interns, especially Elena, our student workers, who is it? Tony, Jalen, and Hotaka, and also my colleague Christian, who worked tirelessly behind the scenes at all our events and also tonight to make this event happen. So thanks go to them as well. And thanks again to the Friends of Volkmar and Margret Sander for raising the funds for our beautiful Steinway upright. I'm still eternally grateful for that contribution. I am, seriously. But now, real seriously, join me in giving a very warm welcome to Dr. Jarecki. Whom I'm honored to award his prize certificate. Thank you so much, and we now are looking forward to hearing your acceptance speech, if we may call it this way. Would you like to hold the mic, or should we put it in there?
I'd be happy to hold the mic. Because, you know, I get tired after the first hour. So, but I am, can you all hear me? I do get sort of my first round of being the second feature on a double feature. That's usually, when I was a kid, that was always the comedy side. So I don't, they have after the serious movie. But I thank you all very much, Moaath, George, Mariette, Steve, for that excellent panel discussion. I thank a lot of people, my wife Gloria, who I'm happy to have here with me. She ultimately will believe all those nice things that you've all said about me. And it gives me great pleasure to accept the Volkmar and Margret Sander Prize this evening. And this pleasure is in part personal, because during the early 1980s, I gave several talks on money and inflation, especially covering the German inflation of the 1920s to the German class of Professor Paul Becker. Volkmar Sander was during that time chairman of the German department, and he is the director and the founder of this Deutsches Haus. As it turns out, Professor Becker's daughter, Claudia, ended up marrying my son, Eugene, and with their children, they're an integral part of our family. So I'm going to start my remarks with a story, which was that in the spring of 1933, 2 months after my birth, Philip Schwartz was a promising professor of pathology at the Goethe Institute in Frankfurt. Hitler had just been made chancellor, and emergency legislation had made him the dictator of Germany. And among the first things he did was to dismiss Jewish teachers and arrest anyone who protested. So on a visit to the Frankfurt Zoo with his young son, a colleague informed Schwartz that he too was soon to be arrested. Schwartz and his son went from the zoo directly to the train station, and from there took a train to Zurich without even a suitcase. On July 2nd, 1933, Philip Schwartz wrote from his exile in Zurich to Stephen Duggan, president of the Institute of International Education and the head of IIE's Emergency Committee in Aid of Displaced Foreign Scholars here in New York. And he wrote that he was looking for positions for threatened German scholars in the United States. As you know, the IIE is the parent organization of the now 16-year-old Scholar Rescue Fund, which has now helped almost 800 scholars fleeing from 55 countries to find refuge in 350 schools and universities in 40 countries, including Germany. Now, to continue with my story, Philip Schwartz was soon contacted by Kemal Ataturk, the Turkey's minister, and by his Minister of Education, who expressed interest in German professors. That night, he cabled 4 words to Zurich, not 3, but 30. When he returned 2 days later, he had made 30 placements. Over the next few years, thanks to the doors that Philip Schwartz opened, Turkey took in 190 German professors. Together with their junior professors, university assistants, and family members, the group ultimately numbered over 1,000 people. Ataturk took advantage of the exodus of outstanding German professors, especially in the fields of medicine, law, chemistry, physics, and math, to completely remake the Turkish universities. Ataturk told Schwartz that the sack of Constantinople in the year 1204 caused its best scholars to flee from Turkey to Europe, and that this had produced the Renaissance. Now, Ataturk said, he was taking the best scholars back. Now another story. It's the summer of 2016. A coup is attempted in Turkey against state institutions and the government of President Erdogan. Since that time, the government has carried out mass firings of Turkish academics without due process. Thousands of professors have been arrested, and particularly those who signed a declaration called Academics for Peace, 6 months before the coup, calling for an end to violence in southeast Turkey. Just 1 month before the coup, the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation held the first round of selections for a new program supported by the German Foreign Ministry to provide safe haven fellowships to threatened scholars in Germany. This new program is called the Philip Schwartz Initiative, and since that time, PSI has selected nearly 150 scholars for support and has now established that as a permanent German program. 6 months after that, in December of 2016, we launched a similar program just in the German state of Baden-Württemberg, my major state of my home university, the University of Heidelberg. And in Berlin and in Essen, there's now a program called the Academy in Exile, which not only gives life-saving fellowships in Germany to threatened scholars, but also gathers them into cohorts to work on issues of academic freedom together. When I look at the applications to the Philip Schwartz Initiative, the Baden-Württemberg Fund for Persecuted Scholars, the Academy in Exile, and the Scholar Rescue Fund, Guess which country today is the source of most threatened scholars? Yes, it's Turkey. In 1933, some of the best German scholars fled to Turkey as an academic safe haven. And for Turkey and for other countries as well, Germany has become the safe haven today. The truth is that I learned this story through my own experiences. Over 75 years ago, I had to flee in fear from Germany with my family, which could trace itself back for generations in Germany, and it was unwilling to believe that the land of Goethe and Heine could be governed by a nativist group of criminals. Surely they can't mean us, my family said. But they did, and we all became refugees. This experience taught me many valuable lessons, and the first one is the importance of action. This principle, in fact, is what inspired the creation of IIE's Scholar Rescue Fund in 2002. Knowing of IIE's history, and especially the work of IIE's Emergency Committee, we gathered a group of trustees and President Alan Goodman and started a small program just in case scholar persecution became a big issue again, as it had in the 1930s in Germany. I really wish we could say that we were wrong. The second principle that I learned from my refugee experience is the importance of engagement and re-engagement. Unlike some of our fellow refugees in the United States, my family re-engaged with Germany as soon as we possibly could. In fact, my brother and I returned to Heidelberg in 1951 to pursue the same medical studies as our father had done years earlier. Doing so was our way of reassuming our character as Germans, rejecting the Nazi idea that Jews were not Germans. The Paul Becker I told you about at the beginning of my talk has now been dead for some years, but he lived in Germany's Iserlohn and was one of my fellow students and closest friends in Heidelberg. And it's he who came to NYU and had Volkmar Sander as a mentor. And here I am today, a small world and one in which we all need each other. Since that time, I've looked for ways to reorient myself to Germany and further strengthen the U.S.-German relationship. In addition to the recent Scholar Rescue Program in Baden-Württemberg, I've worked with a dedicated team, including the dynamic young Mayor Eckhard Wilzner, to develop the city of Heidelberg. That includes developing a part of the city which was once a dilapidated rail yard and making out of it a science campus that attracts talented people and exceptional companies from all over the world. I've helped to refurbish Max Weber House at the University of Heidelberg, funded a playground in the Emmertsgrund, a part of the city with many refugee families. My U.S.-German outlook, as well as my own personal experience as both a refugee and an academic, and now as an interpreter, all give me a unique perspective on what is happening in Germany today. Germany finds itself at the center of the latest refugee crisis. While this time the country is courageously doing what it can to help, even in Germany, the narrative is shifting, and the country, like too much of the world, is moving to the right. This shift troubles me, although I must say that the midterm elections in the U.S. give me some degree of hope. The narrative that I propose for refugees and for helping threatened scholars is this. Throughout history, refugee flows have always been with us. But refugees are not weak, poor, and burdensome. On the contrary, in Germany and here in the U.S., they are smart, strong, ambitious, and young. Our support of them now will yield great results for us into the future. So my lessons are: act against injustice, engage and re-engage, especially with people you disagree with, and above all, be open and accepting to refugees. You know, people worry that the refugees will take what we have, and they've always worried everywhere. The Germans have an old saying, 10 sind geladen, 20 gekommen, gießt Wasser zur Suppe und heißt alle willkommen. Add water to the soup and make everyone welcome. That's an old German folk saying. Those ancestors well understood that a meal cannot be enjoyed, a peace not maintained, and one's own not protected without sharing and compromise. It's a bit of German folk wisdom that has survived all imperializing regimes and their detriments. I conclude my comments with thanks for all who have been participants, not only in this talk, but who are here in the audience, many of whom, Rob Quinn, Sarah Wilcox, Tom Russo from IIE, who have worked with us together in Scholar Rescue. And I thank all of you for being here tonight, and I thank you for the great honor of this award, and I commit myself in the spirit of true and authentic partnership to continue doing this critical and urgent work together.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jarecki, for this beautiful speech, for this inspiring work you have been doing. We are all excited that you will continue to do it with the help of many others in this room, and let this be an inspiration for all of us, for action, for thought, for dialogue with each other, and for people we disagree with. So at your Thanksgiving dinner, talk to the ugly uncle who voted for the wrong party or whatever that is. Of course, we all have perfect families, so this will not happen to us. But keep your mind open, engage in dialogue. Deutsches Haus at NYU will continue to do so. On Friday, we'll continue this series with a panel discussion on economic inequality and populism, very timely. And on November 27 on migration and art. And one of the panelists will be our photographer, who's done a beautiful project on artists active at the US-Mexican border. So that's a outlook. Thank you so much for coming. Have a glass of wine, have a little snack, keep talking. Thank you, Dr. Jarecki. Thank you, George, Mariette, Moaath, and Steve. It was a beautiful evening. Thank you.